welcome to The Debate. I'm your host, Sana Makbul, with you at The Debate on B2B World. In today's show, we will be talking about two very important topics. The first of which is with reference to the situation in India and the arms race that it seems to have gotten involved into and the kind of impact that it's going to have on regional peace and stability. We do know that the Indian side has test-fired a new version of the supersonic missile, and they've spoken about how this has been a success and how it has achieved its targets. But the bigger question here, of course, is what these sort of developments entail in terms of what India is trying to do, acquiring more and more defense capabilities, getting into more deals, and the kind of impact it's going to have on regional peace and stability, specifically with regards to Pakistan and China and other key regional players, and the way that other international key players are going to continue interacting with the country. We'll explore this particular missile capability in further detail as well, the kind of impact it will have on the strategic and defense capabilities of India, and then of course the larger question of the region. We will also be taking a look at the situation with regards to the Europe and US alliance, with regards to, of course, the situation in Ukraine, whether or not any sort of stance or action by Russia is going to amount to invasion, as what Joe Biden had earlier referred to. He had also hinted of perhaps a varying response from the allies side with regards to the kind of step that Russia actually plans to take. A statement which later he clarified as saying that whatever the Russian side is going to do in terms of military infringement with Ukraine, that is going to amount to an invasion, and the response is going to be a coordinated one, something which the Western allies have also echoed. We'll explore this in further detail as to how much of the truth is there in the statement with regards to the kind of strategy and coordinated approach they actually do have, and whether or not that's going to be applicable to any sort of action that the Russian side is going to take, and what action is actually going to entail or result in the kind of steps or swift response that the United States and the Western allies keep referring to. So we'll explore that in further detail. Also, keeping in mind, of course, how President Joe Biden has differed from his predecessors, how his foreign policy actions have impacted America and other parts of the world, and what have been his achievements and challenges, and the difference in the way that his foreign policy has or has not resulted in any sort of renewed alliance by the United States, or any sort of improvement that he actually claimed to have brought into America after, of course, Donald Trump. All of these issues will be explored in further detail. As always, I've been joined by Farooq Latafi and Raja Faisal in the studios for the debate. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. And of course, we will be joined online by respected guests. Two of them have already joined us for the first segment with regards to the situation in India. We have been joined by Mr. Shalinder Singh, who's a veteran of the Indian Army, is also an international and defense strategic analyst. Thank you, sir, for joining us. And we've also been joined by Mr. Fahad Masood, who's an international security analyst. Thank you very much, Fahad, for being a part of the show once again. I'll start with you, Fahad. When I talk about, of course, the new missile test fire that has been conducted, we of course hear that this is something which is a success from the Indian side, something that's added to their capabilities. But as to what really is the power of this particular equipment, the kind of reach it has, let us just first understand the technology of the missile, if you could, please.
The missile itself, BrahMos, as it is known, is one of the latest tests that have taken place by MOD. The important factor is in this whole arena of missile technology within the subcontinent, Pakistan and India, we need to have some point of semblance, and that semblance relates to our understanding of the TSR matrix, which is time, space, relative strength. This was coined by John Warden, Colonel John Warden, to be very exact, in the Gulf War I profile, where he said that the numbers within the theater do not matter. What matters more is the battle space or the engagement numbers. So within the domain of the subcontinent, this missile technology, BrahMos, will not be a huge player. Reason, the negation of the missile technology is already available with the missile technology we have in the form of all the Hatafs that we have, in the form of air-launched cruise missiles to to MIRVs as well. But critical, we need to understand we have parity with India with regard to the regional or the battle space numbers that I mentioned before. That is where the game changes.
Yeah.
Right. Mr. Shalinder Singh, when we see, of course, such developments from the Indian side, and in the past also we've seen the acquiring of a lot of military equipment, other defense capabilities, missiles, we see that the kind of arms race, so to speak, that India has sort of gotten itself involved into, and we keep these coming in. Is this really a need of the hour at the moment? Do you think that this is something that is adding to the defense capabilities because there is a threat that is present at the moment? Or is this something that is just there to sort of showcase its power?
If I have to take this discussion on a without any sides taken, with no India bashing or no Pakistan bashing, then I think I will take this responsibly very well. Even if you change a bullet, it amounts to arms race in the region. Let me accept that very clear. Whether Pakistan does it, China does it, or India does it. So if we do BrahMos, yes, you can technically call it an arms race. You can call it that we are, in a way, stabilizing or destabilizing the environment. But we must understand this. Arms race is not only arms race, it is a need. It's an economic need. It's a defensive need. And if India is doing something which is you are even calling as defensive measure, well, where is the arms race? Arms race should be treated by the other party. And I think Pakistan, over a period of time, has already realized that any acquiring by India or any upgradation by India is definitely not Pakistan centric. India has never ever threatened Pakistan on ground or any action whatsoever since our independence. We have always treated Pakistan as a brother state. Yes, we have differences over J&K, we have differences over terrorism, etc. But our weaponry is not targeting Pakistan. You very well know that.
Right. Before Faisal starts, I just wanted to give a compliment. Colonel Singh, your worldview at this moment is really, really touching, and I hope that in coming days we see more Indian defense analysts actually taking this kind of stance. Over to Faisal, then I'll ask a question later.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention here that of course we know that India's stance towards China for consecutive 45 years, sir, it was a very different stance where they obviously they agreed on no conflicts, no arms there. So obviously whatever India did in between, it was to counter Pakistan and to match Pakistan and to deter Pakistan. But here I just wanted to know, BrahMos, as we know that it is pitched by India towards the Asia Pacific, should we consider that as India is pitching it towards the Asia Pacific and selling it towards the Asia Pacific, is it to obviously negate the Chinese factor in Asia Pacific theater, sir?
Allow me to clarify that. That's a beautiful question. Tell me one thing. If US sells anything, Israel sells anything, China sells anything, it is business. When India sells anything, we are destabilizing the region. Why? Why can't we be allowed to do business? Why can't Pakistan do business? Why can't tomorrow morning Pakistan create an aircraft which is saleable and it strengthen its economy? How does it affect me? It doesn't. If Philippines have bought the BrahMos and we are very on a upbeat on that, and we now upgrade our BrahMos so that others get interested, it's pure business. It is not only a defensive measure to myself, but also pure business. And why are we respecting so much China and US and for that matter European countries? Because they have superior weaponry. They are able to sell. They are able to have countries on their side. Let us as Pakistan and India understand this world matrix of arms race, which we are naming. But actually it is arms business. It's very simple. So as far as India is concerned, even if 2 kilometer range is increased or decreased, or the devastating effect is increased or decreased, how does that become Pakistan centric? I may still accept, okay, now we are very clearly China centric.
Right. With your permission, sir, let me go back to Fahd Saab. Fahd Saab, you were listening to what was being said. I wanted actually you to actually come in as well. But I want to understand another thing. One of our neighbor is arming itself to the teeth. And are we to actually keep on convincing ourselves that it is not going to lead to any kind of escalation at all within the theater? I'm not talking about China, India. I'm talking about Pakistan-India relationship, sir. Please go ahead.
Right. So this scenario is very crystal clear in my humble opinion. One, there is a realignment of blocks in the world which have been there for a very long time. And if we look at what is happening within the subcontinent, the Indian military regime right now is being initiated to walk or stand against a two-front war, which is Pakistan as well as China. China has been a regional player, flexing its political and military muscle and expand itself to be a global power as well. So in the whole context of things, we have to understand that this BrahMos has potential. There is no questions asked, and I would tend to agree with our friend from our eastern border that there is huge role of the dynamics of war making potential globally. It's a market, a multi-trillion-dollar to be very exact.
I get Fahd Saab, that
ahead,
bit.
please.
My concern is, let me just rephrase or qualify my question. I'm sitting in a studio. Next to me are two other people, right? Faisal is here, Sana is here. And all of a sudden, I learned that they have brought, arms or weapons in the studio. And we are told that they are meant for somebody else. But I'm sitting here. Am I not supposed to be worried at all?
The concern will always be there, but if we look at what has happened or happening in the present times, the corners by the military establishment in Pakistan, Army, Air Force, Navy has that covered completely and has been doing it for some time. So concerned, yes. Worried, no. We are already in a situation where we are gaining parity, as I mentioned before, with the time, space, relative strength matrix, because wherever, whenever, whatever is initiated will be negated by the military of the Air Force, the recent most being, as I mentioned before, the 27th.
Right. So what you're saying is that I should also
2019
bring my own weapon, and then I'll be done with
That
the
is the bigger
Faisal
question. Should we actually get that weapon or not?
Could you rephrase the question, please?
Fahad, so as a response to this build-up, like Farooq was saying, should we also be able to also keep on getting more and more weapons then?
Present time, I certainly believe no. The number and the quantity and the quality that we have negates this altogether. If we look at what the Army Air Defense System or the HQ-9P specifically, and we talk of the S-300 equitable, as well as the missile technology that we have, there is no, once again, point of worry, but yes, point of concern should always be maintained so that we remain cognizant of the threat development within the region. And it is the responsibility duly taken care of by the higher commands or the echelons within the military as well as the political government.
Yeah. Colonel Shailendra, here we have a situation where in December 2020, General Narawane goes to his Middle Eastern tour, and over there to the Saudi Arabians, he actually pitched BrahMos. He wanted to sell BrahMos to them. Don't you think that India, that is having a good relation with Iran, of course, Iran is sending 425,000 barrels a day crude oil to India, and India is buying from them. Don't you think that it will actually affect the relations that India has with Iran, just because of this, that they are going to sell their cruise missiles to the Saudi Arabians?
Raja Saab, what you are saying is traditionally correct. But what has happened over a period of time in that so-called economic era, the economic importance which the countries are giving. Now, what has happened is that we are having too many differences with China. Have we stopped the business? Has our business come to zero? US, China is into so much of bashing. Has the business come to zero? No, it doesn't. It doesn't happen. And I think the world is learning this, that if you actually want to conquer or crush the other country, have the might of your army. But at the same time, that is not going to take you through. It is the economic interest which will do everything. I think when we sell BrahMos to anybody, or for that matter, any kind of weaponry to anybody, it has got one very beautiful stand, and that is called as economic gains. And let me tell you one thing. Today, all of us realize whosoever is emerging more as an economic great power, I think it is able to neutralize the so-called supremacy of army by whomsoever.
Right.
I,
Colonel Singh, since you're talking about, yeah, please, Fahad, go ahead. Then I have a question.
Yeah, if
I would just like to add to this. I certainly believe whatever Colonel Saab is saying is 100% true. Another aspect that comes into play is the alignment of national interest. The majority of economic gains are directly aligned to which bloc or which country are we aligned with. If we look at the region once again, to enhance one's economic capability will directly relate to the amount of war generating or maintaining or sustaining potential that a country carries. The number of military might or the amount of military might is a player, but sustenance of that military might is what is going to come into play, and
Right.
economic might is the backup of it.
Right. Fazab, this actually takes me back to Paul Kennedy's book, Rise and Fall of Great Powers. He also essentially talked about this equation between economics and, military power. But let me go back to Colonel Singh. Colonel Saab, since you were talking about this thing, just to understand and perhaps mollify my apprehensions. Let me ask you, when you were talking about the need, Indian need to arm itself, I want to understand, is there a ceiling to this as well? Because at this moment, there are two impressions that I get. One, and people have been chattering about it, that India uses procurements as an instrument of foreign policy to actually curry favors with other countries. The second thing perhaps is that India has to maintain to its own people this muscular image. That's why it will have and it has a procurement addiction. So if you can clarify what exactly is the limit or ceiling to your armament, sir?
Oh yes, I'll tend to agree with you that there is no ceiling. Most unfortunate part in any of such topics, there is never a ceiling. There is never ever going to be that, okay, fine, if I have 4 weapons, then I'll be okay with Pakistan. If I have 6 weapons, I'll be okay with China. It doesn't happen like this. Why? Because development in military is continuous. No amount. For that matter, you tell me one thing. What is stopping US? Nothing stops US, but it is still doing research work. It is still doing R&D, development, and more procurements. Or when I say procurement, manufacturing. Why? Because it's got the double advantage. One is that your supremacy gets established, unfortunately, your supremacy. The second part is that from your supremacy, the weaker countries tend to draw that, okay, fine, we have a need right now, let us buy it. So that is where the economic interest comes in and the business comes in. Now, coming to the point, what you brought out, that whether India needs or not, well, again, allow me very responsibility to say that the needs are very dynamic. Till yesterday, I didn't have a very major need against China. Now suddenly we are feeling the heat. that no, this is not a country to be relied on, in spite of all our agreements, everything. So the needs are also very, very dynamic and changing as per the world, not only as per the neighbor. I'm even prepared to say as per the world. There is a requirement. Yes.
Right.
If I
Mr.
were
Shalinder,
thought,
Mr. Shalinder, we're almost out of time. So my last question to you would be with regards to what you said earlier in response to how this can be taken as an arms race, or that it is a natural consequence if it affects the stability of the region if you're acquiring more arms. Is this sort of a similar approach being taken to sort of engage with the different countries, engage in dialogue with different countries that you're in conflict with? Because as a natural consequence to that also, the balance will shift, right? So would you also, is India, does that have its policy in mind with regards to engaging with this country as how much effort is being put in getting more and more arms?
let me tell you, whether I today like it or not, it's a world understanding. You do not have a dialogue, you will never have a solution. Your solution lies in dialogue. You, me, or anybody can be called as stupid if we are not into dialogue. Now, whether it is behind the curtain or in front, that's a separate topic. But let me tell you, each country is quite responsible that they continue to have some kind of dialogue or talk behind the scene so that we are able to finally come down in front with something, because countries like Pakistan and India, जो दिखता है वो बिकता है. इस समय हमें दिख रहा है कि हम आपस में बात नहीं कर रहे, but we definitely know we are talking when we are doing business. आपका टमाटर, आपका ड्राई फ्रूट्स मैं क्यों खरीद रहा हूँ अगर हमारे बीच में बातचीत ही नहीं है, कोई रिलेशन ही नहीं है? No, that is not the way. I'll very responsibility agree on this
Another
point.
reason, Mr. Shilindra, is because our tomatoes are actually very tasty. So I'm glad you're actually getting both. Our
One last
question to
tomato.
Fahad.
Yeah. Last question from
Let
Fahad.
me finish this on a statement, if you let.
Okay.
Yeah,
Please go ahead, Fahad. Please go ahead.
Well, yes, if you can hear me, I hope you can
We
hear.
can, yes.
We can.
we can.
Credible deterrence is the buzzword. That is where the buck stops. And I humbly request both the sides of leaderships, may it be military or political, the credible deterrence has to be maintained minimum possible to ensure defense and security of a country. But beyond that, flexing the military muscle will relate to anything and everything that goes down the rabbit hole. The
Right.
points, once again, the negotiation table is the key. We need to keep communication channels open, may it be at the forefront or the back burner. That is the only way forward.
Yeah.
Valid point.
Fahad,
But, we're all, unfortunately,
yeah,
almost out of
Fahad,
time.
just
Quick
the last question. Just the last question, Fahad. As we are looking at the obviously Indo-China border right now, and of course, China has been putting on so much over there, and India as well. India put swamps, but of course there isn't that balance of power there. And could we see that India puts forward BrahMos that whose nose looks like MiG-21s very soon? Should they be putting them there in front of the Chinese to balance the power?
Well, balance of power with the quantum and the quality that China is maintaining right now in Ladakh and the northern regions, I don't believe so. The amount of firepower within that small battle space, as I mentioned before, the time, space, relative strength is already enough. So the BrahMos is a credible supersonic missile, yes, as it has already got military sales internationally. But the important aspect within the region, China overpowers anyone within the region itself.
Right.
So
Thank
not
you.
in
Thank
my
you so much,
opinion.
Fahad. We're almost out of time for this segment. Thank you so much, Mr. Fahad and Mr. Shalinder Singh, for joining us. and being a part of this segment of the debate. Our second segment is with regards to, of course, the situation with regards to the alliance, the United States and the Western alliance, against what they seem to be calling in from the Russian side, a possible invasion into Ukraine, and any step that is going to be taken is going to result in a swift retort from their side. Whether or not they're going to be coordinated and their stance is, of course, what remains to be seen. And then, of course, a brief analysis of Joe Biden's foreign policy so far will also be done at the end of the segment. For this, we have been joined by Professor Adil Najam, who's the Dean at the Boston University, and we've also been joined by Leonard Seven, who's a DG of Foundation of Monitoring and Forecasting Russia. Both of these gentlemen will be joining us very soon. Before we start off with the guests who are going to join us online, Farokh, with regards to what is, of course, coming in from Joe Biden's side, first of all, we saw that he spoke about how it will depend on the kind of action that Russia is going to take, what sort of the response is there, and whether or not there's a difference of opinion as to how to respond to that. He later said that their response is going to be a coordinated one. Which one is a more believable statement?
Right. Before I actually go there, because I thought that the guest must have joined already, and that's why you're rushing. I just must point out that I wanted to add to the last segment as well, because it seemed that everybody is so convinced that they are going to be certain, ways the world is going to shape up. And right now, the topic also actually speaks to that. Our problem is that we are listening to pundits, that have never, and I'm talking about IR, international relations experts, who have terrible record of predicting what kind of world order is going to be. They could not predict the start of Cold War, they could not predict the end of Cold War, they could not predict the war on terror properly, and they couldn't even do proper justice to China or Russia's rights, right? With due respect, when you talk about President Biden or President Putin, this is actually how great powers are going to communicate in the future.
Right,
By
absolutely.
actually
Farokh,
exchange of trash talks, and muscular angling. But it doesn't mean that there's going to be a war.
Right,
Please, over to you.
I'll come back to the question now with regards to our second segment, but let me welcome our guests who've now joined us online. Professor Adil Najam, Dean, Boston University, has joined us, and we've also been joined by Leonard Seven, who is DG Foundation of Monitoring and Forecasting Russia. Both of these guests have joined us online. I welcome them to the debate. Can you hear us? I think we're still waiting for our guests to be joining in the segment, and hopefully we will try and establish our contact once again. Farokh, it's your lucky day. I think you can continue what I asked you earlier.
Yeah, I have some black magic that I keep on using all the time. But regarding what I was saying, with due respect, this idea that the US tomorrow is going to fight a Cold War with China, or for that matter, the Russians and the Americans are going to be juxtaposed or interlocked in any kind of world struggle, I think this is premature. Let us take a second to just realize where we are at as a civilization, human civilization. We have been defeated by a microbe. The entire world shuts down because of COVID's various variants. And we are talking about fighting among ourselves when we don't have that kind of capacity to actually, sustain our own livelihoods. It is important, but I can see that guests have joined. Let us, Sana, go back to them.
Right. Professor Adil Najam and Mr. Leonard Seven have joined us online. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us, and apologies for the delay. With regards to the situation, of course, when we see the United States and the Western alliance coming up with the statement that they will be having a coordinated and united stance as a response to any possible incursion by the Russian side, do you think that this statement holds true regardless of whatever action the Russian side is take? Professor Adil, I'll start with you.
I think the statements that we hear, especially after today's meeting, which is really non-statements, is the statement really being made is that we will react when something happens. They should not, and they did not, essentially say, here is what's going to happen. If X, then Y. And we should not expect that sort of a statement. I think at this point, both sides in this case, but there are actually more than two sides, all sides, are weighing their options, hoping that they don't have to take their extreme positions, and trying to also gauge the appetite from other players, whether it be the Russians in the case of the US, whether it be the US in the case of Russians, whether it be the Europeans into large in case of both of them. They're trying to gauge sort of the appetite that the others may have for reaction. So in a way, what I'm trying to say is, I do not read anything at all in these statements, except that there is not clarity on any side of what the appetite should be for action.
Okay, do we at least have clarity, Mr. Leonid, with regards to the way that Russia plans to act? If we're talking about a possible invasion, is that even something which is a possibility given the current scenario and the world that we're living in? Are we just not ruling it out as a possibility, or is there a real probability of this happening?
I not understand why talks about invasion started, because Russia have not any intention to do invasion into Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin and our foreign minister Sergei Lavrov told it very clear. Russia will not invade Ukraine. Russia only afraid about that Kiev will not follow Minsk agreement about situation in Donbas region. And propose about European security system, new security systems, not based on Ukraine. Ukraine is not cornerstone. We should roll back about 30 years ago when we got verbal guarantee that NATO will be not enlarged to the east when Germany started reunion. So it's only wish to start negotiation and got guarantees on the paper from NATO and from United States. But I see that American minds, especially scholars and military political science, would like to confront Russia. For example, if you open Gore institution, you will see the debates around that United States would like to impose blockade of Vladivostok city and Russian Far East jointly with Japan. So they just doing provocation in Black Sea and Baltic Sea and starting debates how to confront Russia.
All right.
Yeah. Professor Adil, can we say that if America is predicting that Russia might invade, obviously, Donetsk and eastern Ukraine, can we say that they are predicting it just because of one reason, and that is obviously invasion of Crimea, because nobody said anything at that time and they did invade it? And if this is the case, then if America does not go for saving Ukraine, can we say that they will be coming up with the fresh sanctions over Russia? And if them sanctions are in place, then is Russia prepared for it?
Yeah, the thing about the question is that there are too many ifs in that. And it's a good question. In a way, I think sitting here in as the rest of the world, as not Russia and not the US, the one key thing to remember is that at this point there isn't an invasion. There is a fear in the US. I don't think the US is predicting. In fact, I don't think. First of all, analysts don't predict, and nor do politicians, nor should politicians. But more importantly, I do not think the US is predicting an invasion. I think what the US is signaling
is a prediction itself,
a warning that there shouldn't be an invasion, right? And that, as you rightly point out, is the shadow of Crimea. In some ways, I think the meta politics of this is also that the US is posturing and creating a narrative of the Russians as someone who might invade, right? So this is not a prediction, this is not a hope. The US probably doesn't want the Russians to invade. The US doesn't probably think they might. The US is trying to send a signal, if you do, and we suspect you might, then here is the red line. And that is where what happened today in the meeting is important, but what happened some hours ago, a day ago, when Mr. Biden, the president, was doing his press conference is as important. And there what we saw was this hesitancy from Mr. Biden to say what the reaction was, because the US has also learned that putting red lines on the ground that are too clear can come and backfire if you cannot back them up. Now, on
Right,
the Russian side,
Dr. Nazim?
I think they are also signaling that NATO should not, quote unquote, invade Ukraine to come even closer to them.
Right.
Right. Dr. Najim, since we are talking about possibility of some kind of conflict or not, and there seem to be, as you pointed out, there are many moving parts, and they can hopefully be contained here. I want to actually take you back to the sociology of another conflict that was 100 years ago, the First World War. It seemed at that time communication was very slow. Today we have tweets and messages. But at that time, one whole year, it took one whole year to actually build up to a war that could have been stopped very easily. Do you fear that the kind of apprehensions and miscommunications there are between the two countries and against each other, this can potentially lead to something that might be akin to an escalation of fight?
Farooq, I think that's a very, very good question. But first of all, let me say, I certainly do not hope that we are looking at conflict in a military term between these two still great powers, or at least one of them considering itself a superpower, and then Russia is a major, major power. So I certainly do not want, and I do not think that that's what we are looking at. I think we are looking at flexing of muscles and so on and so forth. But on Farooq's other question, one sentence, if you allow me. I think this danger of living in an age where communication is fast is very, very real. Because the time, and in some ways, I wish there wasn't that much media. I wish communication wasn't that fast, so that sensible decisions could be taken and people aren't cornered into something that they actually hadn't wished for.
Right. Mr. Leonid, when we see that, of course, Russia itself has its own way of looking at the situation and has its own expectations from the Western alliance as well, and its own hesitancies with regards to their intentions and actions. Of course, we see statements coming in from the US side, but there's obviously also similar sort of stances that we see coming in from the Russian side. What what sort of guarantees or expectations or changes does the Russian side needs to see or expects to see from the Western alliance to be able to be reassured of its intentions?
Moscow already proposed some kind of packet of guarantees from United States and NATO alliance. For example, not to invite Ukraine and Georgia into this military bloc. And after today's meeting of Mr. Blinken and Mr. Lavrov, at least Blinken promised next week to provide some kind of proposals and guarantees on the papers. So it will be first step of discussion, for my opinion. Before it was only blah blah talks. We see that United States not want to listen Russia, and Russia rejected any misdirection of United States. And also there is problem that both and State Department and White House provided disinformation about Russia, or what we do or what we not to do, and etc.
Right. Regarding how Russia actually perceives, can you further elaborate the red lines that might have been drawn by President Putin? Because one has to understand what are the triggers that might actually lead to something bad, if at all.
Mr. Leonid.
Question.
Mrs. Seven.
Yes. Of course, red line will be a serious provocation in the eastern of Ukraine from Ukrainian forces against civic citizens in Lugansk People Republic or Donetsk People Republic. Second red line may be more provocations in Baltic Sea or Black Sea. And of course, next red line will be rejection of to be follow this negotiation process. And of course, Russia already told that we have some military response plan to respond if United States or NATO will block these attempts to start a negotiation process.
Okay, Dr. Adil, when we speak about, of course, earlier when we were saying that this is just a warning perhaps, or a way of communicating what's going to happen if something happens, and perhaps the possibility of that is low, but is there any other sort of reactions or actions that the United States or the Western alliance can take, even if it's not with regards to or as a result of an invasion by Russia, but perhaps given a certain escalation of the current scenario or any step forward that is deemed to be out of place can result in sort of any sanctions or any other measure which does not amount to a military action or escalation, but some sort of a response from their side.
And Dr. Saab, can you also add, is there a limit to how many sanctions there can be?
Good questions, both of them. I think in point A, the escalation is already there, and in some ways, round goes to Russia in the sense that through this conversation, just the fact that we are talking about it, the US has helped elevate Russia's stature as a equal power, right? The US is talking to Russia in terms of that are reminiscent of the Cold War and so on and so forth. So in that sort of signaling sense, I am not sure the US has helped itself in that. In terms of escalation, I think already escalated, and there can be escalation. A lot of the roads to escalation, non-military escalation, might have to travel through Europe rather than through the US. And that goes to what Farrukh is saying, are there limits to sanctions? Right? Sanctions are very much like what parents sometimes do with kids. They work in small amounts. They work when there is the threat and the fear of sanction. But if you put too many of them, they become redundant in the sense that then either sort of people start ignoring them or people find alternatives. So in that sense, in putting sanctions on Russia is, for example, on trade, or for example on finance, is a very different game from putting it on Iran, let us say, or putting it on Cuba, or putting it on North Korea, simply because of the scale of Russia. Secondly, maybe for the politics inside Russia, those sanctions will be seen as a validation of Mr. Putin's point of a West that is aggressive towards Russia and not willing to accept Russia's role as a major power. So in some ways, I think the US will have to be very, very careful. The question really I again come to is that in many ways, the player I would keep an eye on is not as much the US or even Russia, where we know what they're doing or know better what they're doing, but it is the Europeans. If this is about NATO expansion, then what is the NATO countries, what is mainland Europe thinking about how far it is willing to go to push on Moscow?
Yeah, Mr. Leonid, as we know that, of course, the eastern Ukraine, predominantly, of course, ethnically, the population is Russian. So should we consider that, eastern Ukraine is already a de facto Russia, and if Russian armed forces, of course, 90,000 to 100,000 troops, they are there just to save or protect the Russian people?
Not only Eastern Ukraine, half of Ukraine are Russian population. The name of Ukraine is artificial because a few centuries ago it was a line between Polish kingdom and Moscow kingdom. So it's Ukraine based on this kind of artificial mixed ethnic groups. But I think that debates and discussion about Russian troops located inside of Russia are not fruitful, because we can ask, for example, if United States conduct any military exercise on the south, is it mean that United States will invade Mexico? Or for example, if NATO countries conduct exercise inside of Europe, is it mean that will invade neutral country like Swiss and Austria? Of course not. And Russia have our right to conduct any military exercises on Russian territory. And already now we started joint drills with Belarus. So it's our sovereign right to do it.
Right.
And of course, we
absolutely, yes. Yes, thank you, Mr. Lenin. We're almost out of time, so my last question, Dr. Adil, would be with regards to, of course, Joe Biden's foreign policy and how so far he has interacted with the different countries and sort of kept to its claims as when he joined the administration. With regards to, of course, the European nations, as well as you earlier pointing out, it seems that change or that sort of recommitment towards building a trust with them may not have been achieved. Is that so?
I think it is so. I think it is so. I do not think that Mr. Biden has delivered much on foreign policy, but nor should we blame him too much. You know, it's not simply that you can switch on trust. So the trust that was eroded mostly by Mr. Trump, but not just by Mr. Trump, but this trust erosion has happened for a long time, cannot be rebuilt in one day. And so to expect Mr. Biden to do it was unrealistic even on his part. But having said that, I think the surprise at the end of his year is that he hasn't turned out to be this foreign policy president that he was claiming and others were hoping he might be, given all the experience he has, given all the passion he has for foreign policy, given all the knowledge that he has. But if you look at, you know, the big questions on his plate in terms of international affairs, Afghanistan, in some ways, I think he took the only decision he could, and probably a very difficult one. But it's not seen as a foreign policy victory for him. If anything, it is seen otherwise and might even turn even more worse, depending on the situation this winter. Then if you think about relations with Europe, both Europe and the US are so engrossed in their own domestic troubles that foreign policy is on the back burner, and that trust, as you say, is even if better, is not certainly healed. The other issue that he had put a claim on was climate change, and by putting Mr. Kerry, and there too, there isn't a victory for the US. In fact, the US performance at the last COP was as dismal as during Mr. Trump's time. And then comes
absolutely.
Russia. And,
so sorry to interrupt, Mr. Adil, but we're almost out of
see
time. My last quick question from Mr. Leonard would be with regards to Biden's foreign policy, but specifically with Russia and US-Russian relations. Has there been any difference under his administration?
In general, there is no difference who in power, Democrats or Republicans. I think that from era of Obama, they started a process of delegitimation inside of American policy, and they have no effective policy management anymore in domestic policy and also in foreign policy. So I think it's mostly a problem of United States, not Russia. In Russia, we have another situation. We have more.
All right.
More
Thank you very much, Mr. Leonard Savin, for joining us. And Mr. Adil, you want to add something, Mr. Adil? Unfortunately, I think we've lost contact with Mr. Adil, but hopefully whenever we join him once again in the debate, we're going to be able to hear his thoughts as well. Since we're out of time, of course, the situation with regards to US foreign policy and, of course, the impact the different nations' actions has on other key players in the region is always there, which is why every state and every nation needs to act more responsibly and consider all the different consequences that their steps have. And this, of course, goes out to key regional players that affect Pakistan as well. And we sincerely hope that the kind of neutrality and objectivity that was shown by our respected guest today is also something that is echoed from the regime in India. Thank you so much for joining us for the debate, and we'll see you on Monday.